We often talk about the benefits of digital signage for different markets, but there's one group that bridges kind of all the industries, and that's facility managers. Whichever type of facility the facility manager is managing, digital signage can help modernize and streamline messages, alerts, wayfinding, space management, everything really in one centralized platform. To talk about that with me today, I'm with Sean Matthews, President and CEO of Visix Digital Signage. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Derek. How are you? It's great to be here.
It's good to be here as well. For once, not over the phone, live together in the new Atlanta offices. Very exciting. They're quite swanky.
Yeah, actually, we're pretty excited about this, man. I mean, we were in an older facility for many years, and the pandemic changed the way everybody worked. So we had an opportunity to design a facility that would really entice people to come to an office when they wanted to. But, certainly we're sticking to the entire concept of work where you live.
Yeah, work from home, baby. It's the buzzword. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Digital Signage Done Right. Don't forget that you can subscribe to this podcast, and if you'd like to follow along, there is a full transcript on the Visix website. Just go to visix.com/resources/podcasts. Whether you're using digital signage or not, our podcast gives you practical tips for communications and content to better engage your audience. I'm Derek DeWitt. Welcome to Digital Signage Done Right. So, Sean, does Visix deal with a lot of facility managers? And at what point in sort of a digital signage deployment do they come into the process?
Yeah, they're sometimes the ones that are actually shopping for a solution, but it's often IT and or a combo of IT and facilities personnel. Either way, facility managers, they need to be involved at the start when planning, shopping, or implementing a system. We saw a large uptick of people looking at this technology when they were having to manage the reopening after the COVID shutdowns. And they really needed, a centralized way to put out policies and health and safety messages. And so, we're also seeing facility managers getting involved in as the workplace becomes, more connected and collaborative. We have a lot of folks modernizing. Even more to attract talent in competitive labor markets, right? And so they have people coming and going from facilities. And, a lot of really technology companies, finance service companies, law firms, those types of people, they're coming and going from these office spaces. So it's a real mix of being in the office a couple of days a week and then working remote other days. So obviously in the grand scheme, a lot of these facility managers are looking to justify the downsizing of these facilities because they're hoteling those spaces more often. And a lot of these venues are moving towards a more IoT type of setup. So digital signage is being included in these IT plans because it can integrate with a lot of other systems.
Sure, that makes absolute sense. Is there one particular market where facility managers are most involved in the digital signage strategy?
Not really, Derek. I mean, everyone who has a venue has someone managing that venue. And so it doesn't really matter the market, whether it's higher education, corporate campus, medical facilities. It runs the full gamut. They may have different titles, but the job is the same. We do a lot of higher education deployments, and generally they have someone looking at all of the overarching uses for digital signages, across the campus. But most industries need some, combination of communicating with their audiences, alerting them to emergencies, and, on top of that, managing their spaces.
Sure.
And so facility managers are, a great project leader for digital signage because, they have this sort of all-encompassing view of the systems in place, whereas others might, think of it more in silos, in particular to their respective teams.
Right. Facility managers kind of, by definition, have the larger picture, more of an overview, bird's eye view of everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case. And, we talk about silos often, and a lot of institutions have, these silo groups, particularly things like IT and whatnot. But when it comes to facilities, there usually is a fair amount of collaboration, with the exception of some facilities where they have like a for-profit purpose. And even on college campuses, you'll see venues that have a for-profit purpose, even though it's like a conference center.
So what are the specific benefits of digital signage to facilities management?
Well, you mentioned it earlier, and the biggest one is bringing all those things that you mentioned earlier under one umbrella. So you have messaging, alerts, wayfinding, and space management. And it's a huge undertaking to put all that in place. If it's 4 different systems, that's 4 different things you have to shop for, buy, implement, get trained on, manage, maintain. I mean, the list goes on.
Right, and four separate places where something could break down.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. The interconnection between those is always a problem. Yeah, and just managing software updates and security patches and all those things, that's like a full-time job.
Yeah.
So, if you use an enterprise digital signage system versus like a standalone siloed product, you've got it all in one place. The connectivity, the API connections, all that stuff is there. Also, you got to think about this. A facilities manager is focused on operations, but he or she is always looking at expenses. So a system like this reduces printing costs, waste, which it all ties into the environmental efforts we're seeing from a lot of venues, particularly on college campuses and those types of environments. And the larger facility and or the audience, it's often much more economical to deploy digital signage than all of those printed materials that might span an enormous square footage.
Yeah, that's true. Digital signage does seem to be very effective at scale.
Yeah, and there's often this debate about the purchase price of a digital signage system. Often it's a one-time cost, whereas printed communications are continuing, and they're a revenue drain that, add up over time. But, there's a lot of ways to slice how it is that you pay for, a digital signage solution. If you don't want that capital expense, you can certainly go the subscription route, whether it's a software subscription or even, hardware as a service type subscription. So,
Sure.
Anyway, there's certainly a lot of advantages from a delivery perspective and how quickly you can change particularly event-related information and alert information in those venues.
So let's go through some of the things that facility managers might be looking for or want in a digital signage system. Obviously, informational messages. Hey, here's new information that you need. But and you mentioned alerts and a bunch of other things. What else?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's a communication system. It's the most common use is putting up announcements, some sort of feed of some sort, data visualizations, dashboards. Certainly the most popular use of digital signage is event schedules. I mean, just delivering event schedules and the fact that they change often is a very, very popular use. They often also like to localize content to different screens for different audiences, the School of Business versus the School of Law, that kind of thing. So facility managers, do need to plan for that when they're setting up, this type of system solution. If you're going to pull data in from calendars and other external systems, you can do that, but you need someone with knowledge and access to those systems. And we often run into situations where they don't really understand how the event management system works and the data formats that it ultimately spits out. And, also if you have work from home employees or other, type remote audiences, you might want to export those messages to intranets, deliver them to other, web page endpoints, those types of things. That's another consideration that doesn't usually fall under facilities, but it crosses over into that digital signage solution.
Sure, like you said, we have the hybrid workforce all over the place. It's almost kind of like facility management has escaped the facility.
Yeah, I mean, and it really, they have. And the good thing about this technology is that when, messages drop off the screen automatically as they expire, you don't have to worry about going out and like recycling printed posters and pulling them down, which I'm sure facility managers, they appreciate.
Now, when we're talking about messaging, are we including alert notifications as part of that, or is that a separate animal?
Yeah, alert notification is certainly very popular in the higher education space. It's a special type of messaging. It's, a separate app or something in the system that ties into the digital signage solution. It's often triggered by SMS systems that go to cell phones in the form of text messages. Facility managers can use third-party apps like Alertus, Everbridge, Rave Mobile Safety. Those are easy ones that integrate with our solution. That way, if there's an emergency, it's triggered by the SMS solution, and then it overrides all the screens or just certain screens. You can create these alerts in advance to save time, during an emergency. It's almost pre-scripted.
It's interesting. As I was flying here at the airport, I saw a sort of almost an emergency notification like use of their digital signage, which is they took over the screens for these flights right now are boarding, no joke. You better get in there and get to that gate. So even though it wasn't an emergency, it was a kind of an alert notification. And I felt kind of foolish that I had never really thought about that before.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great use of this technology because it's a powerful visual prompt. And historically, when we were in airports, you recall that it was some sort of public announcement address
Which
over.
you cannot understand. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. And and certainly if you take into other languages and that sort of thing, they have to repeat the message 3 times, and you can do it visually much more efficiently. So yeah, I mean, that's a great use of using an alert type function in the event of something that's not a quote unquote emergency.
It's exactly so. Well, it's an emergency if you're trying to get on that plane. On this podcast, we talk a lot about the experience of being in a particular facility. It's not just I go and I do my job. Like there's a whole culture and community there. And you've talked a bit about the workplace experience with obviously messages and alerts. But what about like the customer experience or the visitor experience? We're talking about not internal but external facing communications now. What can facility managers do with digital signs to improve that kind of messaging?
Yeah, probably the number one way to improve that experience is, incorporating a wayfinding aspect into the signs themselves. That's the number one thing that we see used for visitors. Whether it's a campus with new students, a hotel, retail mall, doesn't matter. People want to find their way fast. And, using digital signs for wayfinding is just a good deal more modern than the classic hospital approach of arrows and signs on the walls. It's more economical over time because you can update it as things change, as construction occurs, that type of stuff. You can really do a lot with digital signs in the wayfinding experience.
Right. And not always, but usually that's through interactive touchscreens, usually, or kiosks or something.
Yeah. That's most of the time it is that way. Touchscreens let people serve themselves. We're all very accustomed to kiosk and that type of thing. And we're obviously very familiar with that with our own smartphones. Facility managers can, often offer up directories or event schedules that are tied to maps. So if you find your event and you want to find your location, you can add those together. People can even put in their phone number and have point-to-point directions sent to them. So turn-by-turn type directions. Even if you don't use touchscreens, you can show a map, incorporate a QR code so they can download the entire wayfinding application to their phone, particularly if it's just an HTML5 type project.
Sure. Or heck, if it's not that big a place, but big enough to still warrant wayfinding, even just a static PDF,
Yeah. It's certainly an easy way to, help people find their way around without having to incorporate some sort of volunteer or information desk that just gets disrupted all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Are facility managers using other kinds of interactive content in addition to the wayfinding angle?
Yeah, certainly menu boards are really popular. And at first you think about a menu board and it's not really interactive, but you can incorporate that with a point of sale or order entry type of kiosk as well. A lot of folks have been asking for interactive information boards with things like history or timelines, class photos, athletic teams for schools. Athletics is really into posting their Hall of Fame type thing in every sport. So it's just making really general information much more engaging. Some people do show interactive building dashboards to help in energy saving efforts, water consumption, etc.
Oh, right. This is how much electricity we're using right now. Turn off that light.
Yeah, and there's often suggestions on what they can do, to reduce their footprint while they're in that building. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine that donor boards are all going digital, so facility managers don't have to keep updating plaques and that kind of stuff. And particularly in those environments, you can see the values of those donations increase or decrease over time, particularly if they increase. And, meeting rooms that once had printed plaques or placards, they're all switching to interactive room signs. And whether it be interactive or electronic paper, which is a very green way to go about putting information outside of a conference room or a classroom, you're seeing much more of that than you did just literally 5 or 6 years ago.
Honestly, 3 years of just before COVID even, you're starting to see more and more of these. But meeting room signs, they can still be digital, but they don't have to be interactive. You could have static.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the most efficient space management solution is one that you don't have to, run cables to, and you end up buying like a $1,500 room sign or something like that. And that's where, electronic paper, e-ink comes into play. You don't have interactivity, but the device does not require any hard wiring. It's super lightweight. It looks like a piece of paper on the wall. It only consumes energy or battery life when it's updating the image, which is on screen. And so it typically only changes when the event itself changes. And of course, a lot of people are now starting to incorporate these types of e-ink signs for, desk booking or space booking because they're small, they're wireless, and they're pretty affordable. I mean, depending on the size of the sign, they can be as low as like $10, right?
Wow, that is an affordable solution. So there's literally no excuse for you to not have some kind of digital signage. Come on, folks, $10. Okay, so I'm a facility manager, let's say. What do I need to think about when I'm planning for a digital signage system and when I'm shopping for a digital signage system? What are my parameters?
Well, the very first thing is, hopefully there's some overall buy-in about why are you even doing this? If you can't answer the question why, then you're just spending a lot of money. But let's just assume you have a good answer. Why are we doing this?
Because it's a good idea.
Yeah. And you've mapped out all the things that you believe that this technology can do to help your facility. And so obviously the very first thing would be how many displays, what type, where will they go? That's the very first step. You need hallway intersections, elevator bays, places where people congregate is certainly a good location. And since there are usually multiple teams contributing to this content, that can affect the number of licenses that you need. So you really want to work that out in advance. You'll also want to look at what systems and apps you're already using that you might want to tie into these screens, for things like KPIs, event schedules, that kind of stuff. So and certainly on the alert side as well. And you'll also want to think about hosting your CMS in the cloud or on premise. Obviously, the cloud is all the buzz these days. Everyone wants to talk about subscriptions and the reduction of work on the IT force if it's in the cloud. But some people still want a subscription that's on premise. So it's something to keep in mind. And there are cloud advantages and on-premise advantages, and they can be subscription or perpetual. It doesn't matter. And I'll say that like one of the coolest places that we have in terms of deployments, University of Wisconsin in Madison, they took the time to create a document that mapped out every single display, its branding, what messages go on it, who's responsible for those messages, and it made the deployment incredibly smooth, like much smoother than most that we see.
That's kind of the digital signage deployment version of measure twice, cut once.
Yes, for sure. Yeah. But if you don't want to do all of that and go through that exercise, make sure you tell everyone up front. Don't just spring it on them after it's in place because, you went from a blank wall to now you have all these displays and, people are like, well, what are we supposed to do with them?
So, as I said, we often use the word experience in a lot of our writing and this podcast and other things. We're talking about employee experience. We're talking about customer experience. We're talking about visitor experience. But for busy facility managers who are trying always to streamline systems, digital signage can help with all of these things by unifying visual messaging, alert systems, and room management into a single platform that, if it's web-based, honestly, it can be managed from anywhere, honestly, right? From the beach.
Yeah, that's my next stop. I'll be managing this from the beach. So, as we wrap up today's conversation, I'll be thinking about that beach investment.
Very nice. Just don't get sand in your laptop. Thank you, Sean Matthews, President and CEO of Visix, for talking to me about digital signage and how it can help facility management. Thanks, Sean. Always a pleasure, and good to see you in the flesh.
Yeah, good seeing you, Derek. I appreciate you taking the time, and as always, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody out there again, for listening to this episode of Digital Signage Done Right. For more free stuff, head to resources on Visix.com for guides, videos, and more to help with your visual communications. Please subscribe and share, and contact us for information about our digital signage solutions.